here. Chairman's mark.
you hear me okay?
Okay, I'll call this State Planning and Community Affairs meeting to order, February 9th, 2022. And Representative Camp, if you could bless us, please.
Our Father in heaven, please bless us that we will be mindful of the bills being presented to us, and bless us that we will use discernment to make wise choices for the state of Georgia. We're so thankful for the blessings that we've been given. We're thankful for all that we've been given by you, and so thankful for your son, Jesus Christ. And we say this in his name, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Well, we're going to kind of switch it up a little bit. Representative Lim, if you will come forward, and I think what we'll do is present 725 first, if you don't mind, and then go into 1131, because is that all right with you?
That works for me. Thank you, Chairwoman.
Great.
Good morning, everybody. So we are, again, starting with HB 725, and that is, to be clear, LC 441717. This bill is relatively simple. It aims to ensure that our state's three state-recognized American Indian tribes, we don't have any federally recognized tribes. So those three state tribes are the Cherokee of Georgia, the Georgia Tribe of Eastern Cherokee, and the Lower Muskogee Creek Tribe, each have representation on our existing Council of American Indian Concerns under DNR. We know, of course, COVID-19 has disproportionately impacted many communities, including indigenous communities, and really exacerbated some of the existing inequities. But despite substantial federal resources, it's still a challenge to get some of these resources out to the community. So the council, in that sense, is particularly important. And having spoken to members of the council does generally ensure such representation by at least one member of each of those tribes. But since before I was elected, I particularly worked with folks from the Georgia Tribe of Eastern Cherokee, and they, among I think all of us, want to ensure that proper representation is on the board, as there are also candidly disputes among who those representatives are. So by codifying what is already common practice, I hope that we can ensure again that the proper folks from those three tribes are at the table. And that's what this bill essentially does.
Are there any questions? I have a question.
Yes.
There's three tribes. Is that what you said in the state of
Yes.
Georgia? East Cherokee, and then what were the other two? I'm sorry.
The Cherokee of Georgia, the Georgia Tribe of Eastern Cherokee, and the Lower Muskogee Tribe.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. I'll entertain a motion. Oh, excuse me.
I'm a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. I just kind of wonder, you said the Eastern Cherokee, so they're not federally protected at all, or
Correct.
they have no citizenship at
Correct. They don't have, none of these tribes have federal recognition. And if you speak to each tribe, there are those that are pursuing that status. It's a long, often difficult process. And there are those for their own reasons that aren't. Without getting too much into it, it can be very political and there are disputes. And that really speaks to the issue here. Again, making sure that at least with what we have, the structure that we have, that there is proper representation. So I hope that answers Representative McLean's question.
Thank you very much. We'll talk offline a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Representative Campbell?
Yeah, I was wondering, does this carry any financial differences in what we're doing as is, or any considerations there, any changes?
It does not. There is no fiscal impact. And just to reiterate, it wouldn't really change some of the common practices, but the codification serves a purpose to ensure that representation.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Representative Anderson?
Madam Chair, at the appropriate time, I'd like to make a motion.
Thank you. We have a couple, thank you. We have Representative Maynor on Zoom. Can you hear us, or can we hear you?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I just wanted to make a comment and tell Representative Lim, thank you for bringing this to our attention. I personally would not have known that those tribes that you mentioned were not represented. So I appreciate you bringing the bill to the table.
Thank you, Representative Mader, as well, for being a co-sponsor of this bill. And as I said to the other, this is certainly not about me. I do not claim the status, but I have reached out to all of these tribes and just want to make sure that we are doing our best for them.
Thank you, Representative Lim. Representative Anderson, you continue with your motion?
Yes, ma'am. I make a motion to pass.
And we have a do pass in a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Who was that? Okay, she was, okay. Any opposed? Thank you. And your bill has passed.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Have you heard anything from Representative Knight? Oh, well, let's go ahead and hear House Bill 1131.
Yes, I was stepping back in case Chairman Knight was here. So yes, this is House Bill 1131. That is LC 280385. And what this bill essentially does is to ensure that our local Georgia citizens and taxpayers have as much access to information about these large sums of federal money that are coming here. These are funds that as taxpayers, they particularly pay into and have potential great impact on their communities. And it aims to achieve that access to information by creating a legislative overview mechanism to access that information. It is tailored after the overview mechanism in the One Georgia Authority. So we've now seen expenditures of this sum under two administrations, with the CARES Act under former President Trump's administration, of course, ARPA, or the American Rescue Plan Act, also known as the state and local fiscal recovery funds under the Biden administration. And we will see more with the infrastructure bill already, and I would anticipate more beyond that. And we want to be proactively prepared to have a mechanism in place to ensure that those most directly affected by such funds, our own constituents, to have that information on how those funds, on what these funds are, how they're being used, and how they're being expended. And here I want to say we, because I've had the pleasure on working with this, with Representative Camp from the start, or even from before the start, because we come from different communities in the rural-urban divide. We come from different parties, but we have noticed over the last over a year now, a lot of the same commonalities that bonded us, because we have seen both unserved and underserved communities. So myself, I live in the fifth most non-white district, House district, and also have the largest proportion of Hispanic residents, but I also have about a quarter of the people living at or below federal poverty. So I, Representative Camp, and I'm sure some of you spent a great deal of your 2021 and part of 2022 essentially doing everything you could to facilitate that these funds would come to your communities through the nonprofits and the for-profit businesses that would use them. Folks that are really doing the work in our communities, particularly for, again, our most vulnerable residents. And it wasn't always easy. There is a lot of money out there and a lot of legitimate necessary processes, and these are also new. So in my mind, it's not a question, and this is why this is partisan, it's not bipartisan, excuse me, it's not a question of partisanship, it's a question of how do we cut through that bureaucracy to get that information. So what this bill aims to do, again, tailored after the One Georgia Authority overview mechanism, is to provide overview for federal funds like ARPA or the infrastructure bill, either driven by, as the language says, limited one-time emergencies or formula funding over $1 billion that would allow, this mechanism would allow for legislators, again, us who are most directly interacting with our constituents and the public, to be able to access information on that funding. To be clear, it will not affect the decision-making that rests in our governor. The governor still has full authority on how these funds are expended, but it would allow for a good deal of, again, local access and, in that essence, control over this information. An analogy that I've taken to using is we saw what happened with unemployment insurance. That was a federal program, and how that was administered through our Department of Labor. And I know our commissioner in the middle of the process relied on us as members of the legislature, who are, again, interfacing most directly with our constituents. So by being more proactive and establishing ahead of time this kind of mechanism, again, it's ensuring that our citizens, our residents, have access to, again, how these funds are expended, and are also proactively in the best position to figure out how they can access these funds in the future. And I wanted to mention here, I appreciate having spoken to the speaker about this, as well as the governor's office. So I will leave it at that for now.
Representative Camp.
Thank you so much, Representative Lim, for bringing this bill. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. On this bill, I just wanted to clarify that the overview committee would be almost a mirror to the same structure as One Georgia. So it would be 3 members from the House, 3 members from the Senate, and 3 members from the governor's office who comprise this board. Have you heard anything when you did speak to the governor's office? Did they give you any feedback on this?
I have not spoken directly to the governor, but the governor's office, and in transparency, Representative Camp was there. They seemed there was no objection to it. I think they very much understand why this bill exists. Again, it does not seek to take power away, but in some ways makes their job easier. And we spoke to them about the analogy to the Department of Labor. It also, to anticipate potentially Representative Campbell's question, this also has no fiscal impact because this would rely on HBRO, or House Budget and Research Office, and Senate Budget and Resource Office, folks that are already in position to do that work anyway. So it would not have that fiscal impact as well.
Follow-up question. This would also impact any emergency funds, clearly, and that would include natural disaster funds as well, correct?
Yes, that is correct. And again, we oftentimes see in those moments, these are emergencies, of course. And so we cannot fully plan for every emergency, but we can do as much as we can to prepare for it. And to ensure, as per this bill, that this money that does exist gets to those that really need it the most.
Vice Chair Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Lim, thank you for bringing the bill. I had a similar question concerning this just this morning. And my question to you today is there any oversight from the federal government already in place? Since these are federal funds, is there any oversight from the federal government already in place? And will we be mirroring what the feds have already set up?
That is a great question, and I'm actually quite glad you asked that. This is ultimately a bill, to me, I can be a dork about it for a second as a lawyer, about federalism. And there is certainly a great amount of, again, legitimate oversight, particularly with ARPA, that is the US Treasury. And so to be clear, what we're doing certainly doesn't conflict any of that, because again, this is about the information that we're accessing. At the same time, it really builds on that. And I want to mention, in the final rule issued by the Treasury on the ARPA funds, again, that's the state and local fiscal recovery funds, I think it was on page 400, they had 2 pages about transparency. And so to me, that seeks to fill a gap. What so much of the Treasury has done is to figure out how that money needs to be expended ahead of time and setting those rules and guidelines. There's fewer guidelines, and I think in our role of federalism, it's up to the state to figure out, particularly looking back, what the level of transparency is to see, why was this project funded? Why was this project not funded, et cetera? So to concisely summarize all that, it is certainly complementary to what the Treasury does, but serves its own purpose that the Treasury or the federal government more broadly does not do.
Follow up, Madam Chair. I know there was a lot of conflict with the PPP monies, and a lot of people, you've seen in the news, a lot of people got in trouble with the PPP funds. With that same oversight with that, is that the same thing that will come down to our local levels that came from the feds with the PPP?
For this bill, in the sense that you could, with this, potentially gather more information that wouldn't be gathered otherwise. So with respect to PPP, we know, unfortunately, the government has only uncovered a tiny sliver of the fraud that did exist. Again, these are large funds, and the feds don't have all of the resources to do that. But again, I think that's where we step into place. And with this mechanism, ensuring that legislators have this access to that information, we would more easily or have greater chances to be able to identify fraud and other problems with some of the administration of federal funds. So in that way, it again complements what the feds do, but really builds on that and takes what I think is the state's role.
Thank you.
Representative McLean.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to say thank you too, but on line 31, you say the committee shall periodically inquire into. What does that mean, periodically? I mean, it Is that like monthly, quarterly, yearly?
That's a good question. The aim of it is to ensure that there will always be essentially oversight. The word periodically is used only in the sense that because these funds don't come all the time. So to state a specific timeline when there might not be funds that exist that would fall in the purview would create a little bit of a, well, we're required to do something that we can't do. So the word periodically was used to ensure that, yes, they would do so as often as possible, but take into account that there might not be at any given time funds that fall under the purview.
Follow up, Madam Chair. So if funds you cannot say quarterly, I'm just trying to, the word periodically is just giving me problems because it's not defined. And I just didn't know if funds were not coming in, I could understand, but I just wanted to see if that was just something that could be definite.
So I hear exactly what you're saying. The way that we built the language in, because this was a deliberate choice, if that hasn't come across, is by ensuring that you have all of these people that are represented, you have more than one body pushing along the review of it. So even though there is not in the language of the bill a requirement as to the periodicity, a specific requirement as to the periodicity, by creating the structure of accountability of a variety of different bodies, that's what would push along. And you can imagine folks that the number of people appointed as well as HBRO and SBRO, they would be the ones that ensure that the periodically in spirit and in letter are met. So I hear what you're saying. The address to it or the way we addressed it was not the specificness of the language, but the structure that we created.
Thank you.
Apparently, the Office of Planning and Budget would be reporting on that the first day of January of each month when those special funds each year, when the special funds, if I can spit it out, are allocated. Is that correct? It looks like it's on line 41.
Oh, right. With respect to the reports, yes.
Periodically, I'm
Yes.
just trying to help with the periodically.
Yes.
What does that really mean?
With respect to the reports, that is correct. The reports are coming at the back end. So again, you want to cover every step of the process. And I think part of what Representative McLean's question is, well, in order to have a report, people have to care about this and inquire into it. And with that, we use the periodically language because that's towards the front end of the process. And again, it's the structure that we hope will ensure that people will inquire into it enough that a report can be issued per line 41, et cetera.
Great, thank you. Representative Maynor on Zoom?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I have a couple comments. One about the periodic. What comes to mind for me is usually when there is a board, and you mentioned there would be a total of 9 board members, the board would establish their own bylaws, so to speak. And so maybe we can leave the task of defining periodic to that board. That's just one suggestion. The other thing that I wanted to just say in relation to why the bill is important, the first thing that I think about are the funds that went to our schools. You know, our kids were doing virtual learning and there were lots of questions for just communities. What is happening with the funds? And I went to a conference actually over the summer and they did a breakdown of some interesting ways schools used the money. One of the ways was they resurfaced the turf and it was $1 million project. So in that vein, I think that it's very important that there is some public notice, so to speak, on where the funds are going, just because at the federal level, it's just not as accessible. So at the state level, I think it's a great idea.
If I may respond to that, thank you, Representative Mader, also for supporting this one. I know with respect to the first point, and she having had recent experience with her FT on this, I think that is exactly right. You do need to leave some level of deference for the board to do it. And again, that's why it's so important to create the right structure for it. And then with respect to her second ones, I think that is absolutely correct. At the end of the day, it is I'm sure many of you have inquired with a variety of different actors on the federal, state, and local level, have inquired, not specifically with ARPA, but with other funds, with open records requests, et cetera. Again, this attempts to streamline that so that you don't have to jump so many hoops to get, again, information regarding the money that is paid by and should go to your communities.
On line 41, it says the committee shall on or before the first day of January of each year and such other times as it deems to be of public interest. That would be the special funding.
Yep.
And they would submit to the General Assembly a report of its findings, Representative Maynor. So I think what you're saying is covered. With the recommendations are based on the review of how they handled the special funding. So
Yes.
on line 41, 42, 43.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sure. Representative Singleton, can you hear us?
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Just one quick, actually a couple quick questions. One, just so I'm clear, the board is uncompensated, correct?
That is correct.
And you mentioned the no cost because OPB and those entities are already doing analysis. Have we confirmed with them that they have the manpower available to do this at no additional cost to them?
Yes, we did cover that with the governor's office. And again, this is not something that aims to add work to them. It in fact aims to take a little bit of that work away from us, from them, and without costing us on the General Assembly side anything, this would allow the power of our General Assembly and particularly this board to be able to gather the information that we need. Of course, to Representative Singleton's question, that would create more dialogue essentially, but it would not, in essence, create a fiscal impact.
My concern is, just to be specific, is having been on a few of these boards, I'm sure you have yourself. There's a staff component, there's a work requirement that always goes in behind the scenes besides the political appointees that are on the board talking about it. And so I just want to make sure that we fully considered the work requirements and, who's putting together the actual report every January. It's not going to be you and me, who's going to be putting those reports together.
Yes, Representative Singleton, that is a very important point, and that's why it was critical to us in drafting this precisely to include HBRO and SBRO, so that it's not the legislators essentially doing the inquiries and drafting the report. Yes, we need the structure, the staff support to be able to do that. And again, to emphasize staff that are already in this line of work anyway, but to Representative Singleton's point, no, we wouldn't be putting together that report, and we built the structure so that we wouldn't be the ones as legislators doing that.
Thank you. And just one more question, Madam Chair, if I may. Last question is just the actual functionality of the board. I understand it's an advisory role or oversight. Do they have any legal teeth as far as the directing of funds or the accountability of funds? I'm just trying to, I love accountability. I'm just trying to wrap my brain around what the actual brass tacks, no joke, what is this going to actually do and give and provide for us that we don't have?
Representative Singleton, I would relate my answer back to Representative Jackson's question, in the sense that, and as I said at the beginning, it would not change formally the decision-making. That still lies with the governor. But if information is power, and if we have so much of this information that isn't being uncovered, then creating a structure that would allow for the better, more streamlined compilation of that information and relate that to accountability with our citizens. Because again, I want to emphasize, we are the ones most directly interfacing with our citizens on this money. I get these requests still all the time. That would be where the accountability lies, by allowing that information to come to us. And if that information uncovers something that we want to address, using that, because I think at the end of the day, the legal mechanism of the decision-making over the funds, again, things at the front end, they get a lot of attention, but the back end, per what I said regarding, the Treasury's guidance or lack thereof a little bit, relatively speaking, that's where we would come in. And I think that's where the accountability teeth is.
Representative Mitchell?
Turn this on. Oh, there we go. I had a question about objective here. Is the objective for this information to get to the public or the objective for this information to get to the legislators?
Ultimately, the information is best in, excuse me, let me rephrase. The main objective is for the information to get to our residents and constituents. And we can define that in ways as those who might apply or be affected by the funds, apply being nonprofits, for-profit businesses that are going after broadband, stormwater funds, et cetera, or in some cases, even the individual directly. So that is ultimately the goal of it, but it is through the legislators that they would get that information. I think a good example is during with the administration of the state fiscal recovery funds, I and probably most, if not all of you, had businesses or even, just people reaching out to you regarding seeking information on these funds, how they would be distributed, et cetera, et cetera. So it is for them that this bill really matters, but it uses us, as we've been used in some instances already, to get that information to them.
And would there be value, given that the objective is public access, to having a public facing portion of this report so folks could actually see it for themselves rather than have to add the extra step to go through a legislator?
Just to be clear, you mean with respect to accessing the report?
Correct.
Well, those reports are publicly available. And we would certainly aim, and the aim of this is to ensure that those reports get to our public. But I did want to emphasize, and this is why I clarify, the report is important, but it's also the day-to-day information that may come in that might not make an ultimate annual report that is very important. There's not necessarily a public-facing mechanism for that, but that is why, again, the structure of this is what matters.
And to get that day-to-day information, the majority of the legislature would rely on this body deciding that it is such a time as it deems to be in the public interest to share that with the legislature.
That is correct.
Plus it will be online too. It'll be, all that would be available online.
If they chose to share it. But so all of this committee's proceedings would be online, or just what they send to the rest of the legislature?
It should all be made public.
It's all public.
Okay.
It's all public. I just wanted to, with regards to the proceedings, did you have any specific proceeding in mind that I can address to?
No, so I was thinking a little bit about the question of periodicity and then the January deadline,
Mhm.
and thinking if we have an issue with something that happens in January 31st of one year, is it what is the lag time between that program initiating and actually there being information? Because something like unemployment, that's a very big impact in those 11 months.
Right. Yes. And I think that's why it was important to Representative McLean's question to include the periodically language, because, and I tried to emphasize that earlier as well. Yes, there's the annual report that is important, but to Representative Mitchell's point, these things are going on all the time, and information that is gathered by this body, again, it is not for this body to just sit on. So even though that wouldn't be, at the end of the year, if there's information that is valuable, it is incumbent upon the body. And again, we created this structure so that they would be able to essentially broadcast that information. So again,
Thank
it's
you,
the structure.
Representative. We have Representative Dukes online. Can you hear us, Representative Dukes?
I'm trying to.
There we go. We can
Do you hear me now?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Representative, for bringing this bill. I'm sorry that I engaged a little late, but my first question is, who appoints this board? I'm sure you went over that, but for my edification, I would like to know.
Yes, Representative Dukes, if you look at lines essentially 13 through 30, it shows who is appointed by whom. That is 3 members of the House, our House appointed by the Speaker, 3 members of the Senate appointed by the President of the Senate, of course, the Director of SBRO and HBRO and their designees, and 3 members of the General Assembly to be appointed by the Governor.
Thank
Okay.
you. Representative Mallow.
Hello?
I'm gonna go back to her. She's already asked.
Thank you, Madam Chair, to Representative Lim. Thank you for bringing the bill. Just to make it in layman's terms, this would help us to essentially figure out if the federal government sent money for buses and a entity came back to the state asking for the state to appropriate similar funding, we would know that they had already got money from the federal government for such an action. Would that help us to understand that information?
That would achieve this. Yes.
So essentially, we'd reduce the duplication of services for
Yes.
monies that have already been allocated.
Yes.
Thank
Again,
you,
it's
sir.
like we reduce the duplication by gathering more information and ensuring that the efforts at gathering the information themselves aren't duplicated.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Representative Mellon. Representative Dukes, did you have another question? I want to make sure to answer all your questions if you did.
I thought he was done. I'll take one more from Representative Minor. One question.
I did have another question. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. We didn't hear you.
Okay. The other question was this, and that is, who determines the pertinency of the information? You know, we have the report that comes in once a year, but then you mentioned that if something comes up that is pertinent, that it will be released. And I'm trying to determine, how have you defined pertinent information and how does that process takes place?
Yes, the pertinency of the information, again, apart from the report that is required at the end of the year, and I think this again relates to Representative McLean's question, it is determined by this body. And that's why we wanted to ensure a relatively broad structure and an appointment, because we don't just want to rely on one person or two people to determine what is pertinent. You want that diversity and variety to ensure that the needs of and the concerns throughout the state are being heard. And I would also add that, you know, under the current structure, it is already up to us in many ways to determine the pertinency of the information. I think with Representative Kemp and I, we took it upon ourselves throughout 2021. And again, others of you that determined whether or not something was pertinent when it came to CARES or ARPA Act. So in that sense, we are not changing what already is the reality. We're creating a structure and a structure of accountability to ensure that we can point out more of the information that needs to be uncovered or discovered, studied, and ultimately put out to our residents and our Georgians.
Thank you. Representative Maynor, one more question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Lim, you mentioned that you and Representative Kemp spoke to the governor's office and also Speaker Ralston's office. What was Speaker Ralston's thoughts on your bill?
What am I allowed to say? Supportive, is very supportive. I will say that it was their office, particularly Keith's idea, to ensure that we tailored this to the One Georgia Authority Overview Committee. So to give credit, a lot of credit where the credit is due, that is where that came from.
Representative Camp.
This is not actually a question. I apologize, Madam Chair. This is just a follow-up. The reality is this came to be because we discussed transparency, being a very underserved area for a litany of reasons, much like Representative Lim. We don't have grant writers in our communities. We don't have strong lobbyists that come and really advocate because we are a small underserved community. So having the opportunity to be able to talk to a member of the overview committee to say, what happened? What can we do better next time? We're not going to undo anything. We're not going to change anything because the governor was allocated the funds by the federal government. Ultimately, his office has the decision-making abilities. But as a member of the state legislature, we have the responsibility to be able to go back and talk to our citizens, which is what Representative Lim's been saying. And to be able to say, you know, we didn't get this grant for this reason. So next time we need to do A, B, C, and D, so we can be prepared. Going back, I can tell you, going back to my community and saying, we're waiting on the governor's office was swamped because they had thousands of people calling them every day asking how these funds are going to be allocated. this is just an opportunity for a little more transparency. It is not during, but it is after the fact. Of course, the broadband funds, the governor awarded $408 million, which is phenomenal, but there were a large number of communities that did not get the funding. Being able to understand a little more of the process, being able to talk to your state representative or your state senator about it is huge. And it's our job as representatives to actually represent the people. So I'm in full support of this bill. So thank you, Representative Lim.
Thank you, Representative Camp. I just wanted to emphasize that point. No matter where you are, we have underserved or unserved communities. And in the last couple of years, so much of the dialogue hasn't been, what do we need to expend or how much more do we need to expend, but getting the money that has already been allocated to those that need those the most. And oftentimes they are those that are struggling the most. You think of the small broadband business, the small nonprofit. They're the ones that struggle the most to get that information. And particularly if you're in a smaller municipality or county, to Representative Camp's point, you don't have an economic development engine or your own grant writer to be able to figure out what to do. So in that sense, the back end information here is valuable because this is not a one-shot deal. If this were a one-shot deal, we wouldn't need to create this particular committee. But because we know that these funds will happen, emergencies happen, formula funding happens, by getting information on what has already happened, we can better prepare our communities, and particularly those that probably have the least access to this information but could most use it. We are preparing them for the next time and increasing their chances of getting them the money that really needs to go and is theoretically designed for those communities.
Good, Bill. Well thought out. I'll entertain a motion. I have a motion. Do I have a second? Second. I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? Thank you. Your bill passes.
Thank you. Thank you, committee. Thank you,
On
Madam
to
Chairman.
rules. And Chairman Knight had a conflict for House Bill 530, so we will postpone that to our next meeting. Thank you, everybody. Well, I appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And we will adjourn.